Okay, so let's go ahead with the next section on requirements. Specifically, of course, security requirements. I think you know what requirements are. Have you done some requirements engineering module? Have you had a module specifically to requirements engineering? How to collect requirements for software? No? Okay, so this is just given. So let's shortly explain what requirements are. So a requirement, according to the IEEE, is a condition or capability needed by a user to solve a problem or achieve an objective delivered by software. So a condition that is a non-functional or a capability is a functional requirement. A condition or capability that must be met or possessed by a system or system component to satisfy a contract, standard, specification, or other formally imposed document. Or a documented representation of a condition or capability as in 1 or 2. So this is very generic. So I would propose to use the last one, which I wrote here. A requirement is a singular documented need of attributes, functions, or quality aspects of products. It documents certain criteria to assure that the final product has all the attributes which were intentionally requested. What does that mean? So that means that you should actually describe everything that you expect about your software in some kind of documentation. You never do this 100%, obviously, right? So you won't be complete 100% in doing that. But it helps writing up the important things. So therefore, for security, we'll write up the things so for you to get a better grasp on this. You can actually categorize requirements like top-level requirements, architectural requirements, technical specifications, and one distinction I would like to emphasize, and I already talked about this a little bit yesterday and this morning, is to distinguish between functional requirements and non-functional requirements. A functional requirement documents the function of a system, like the security functions, like authentication in our case, or encryption capabilities. A non-functional requirements documents constraints of the systems, like secure functions, like a module is secure against eavesdropping, communication is secure against eavesdropping, or a specific functionality is input field is secured against SQL injection. That would be non-functional requirements. And this is important to distinguish because most security functions, if you talk to customers, are non-functional. They would say something like, I would like this to be secure against, or it would say something like, I would like to be this secure as all the other systems I have. He won't say something like, actually, I need this and this field to be encrypted, and I would like the communication to be secured using SSL, and please use a certificate which is produced according to specific security quality requirements. That's not what the customers will talk about. So this transfer between which security properties the software should have and how this is actually achieved using security features, this is your job. So you need to think about, so you need to discuss with the customer what his requirements are, mostly non-functional, and the transfer, how to map these non-functional requirements into functional security aspects or capabilities in terms of, I need to test this a number of times so that it's not going to be hackable afterwards. This is something that you must do. So this transfer is something which is on your plate. So requirements shall be documented and approved. So someone should say, well, yes, I need this. And revisable. Revisable is meant so that you can correct it later on if necessary. But the most important thing that a requirement should have for a developer is an acceptance criteria. An acceptance criteria is a way of verifying that the requirement is met. Okay? So acceptance criteria are vital for a precise and thorough security requirement analysis, since only if the acceptance of requirements is specified, the security assertion can be made. And this is especially true for non-functional requirements. Let's take an example. Functional requirement, this website has an authentication. Acceptance criterion, visit the website. The requirement is met if the authentication is needed before internal information can be accessed. And define what internal means. Non-functional requirement, confidential information can only be accessed after successful authentication. Acceptance criterion, try to access confidential information 100 times and observe that for each of these access trials, a successful authentication is required. There's something you should observe now. The function, how often will I execute probably the acceptance criterion testing procedure for the first example, for the functional requirement? How often will I execute this? Once. For non-functional requirement, 100. Why 100? The reason is that you cannot actually verify the assertion confidential information can only be accessed after successful authentication in total. You cannot prove this because you would need to know all different means that you could access this information. Right? This is not possible. This is a negative statement. Can only be accessed. Actually, what it says here is if confidential information is not accessed through successful authentication, this is not possible. And you cannot prove this. You can only try and get as close as it's useful for you. So it's an approximation. This is a very important thing. The assessment criteria for non-functional requirements, non-functional security requirements specifically, are only approximations of reality. So you make decisions how good this approximation will be. I could have said 10 times. I could have said for 2 weeks. I could have said with the skills of an experienced hacker. So these are variations of the acceptance criteria where you describe how close you want to come to this absolute statement. You will never reach 100% security. So it's a decision to make, together with the customer maybe, it's a decision to make what is an acceptable acceptance criteria for a non-functional requirement. Something that works for your setup. If you're building software for the stock exchange, then probably this acceptance criteria will be very different than if you're building software for your football club. Right? So this is something you need to apply, and we will have an exercise on this later. How to define good requirements? There are 3 tasks beside identifying the requirements. Defining the scope, identifying the relevant stakeholders, identifying the compliance system. Scope is where the software is used, so where it's not going to be used specifically. Stakeholders is an important aspect for security because often you have hidden security requirements. Requirements that are not coming from the customer you're talking to, but from other people. Like, for example, the customers of your customers. So if you build a website, the customers of your customers, the users, may have additional security requirements that the customer doesn't know or doesn't think of. If you're running in a regulated environment, the regulator, the state, could have additional requirements. Could I say, okay, let's take stock exchange. The stock exchange itself says, well, yeah, I'm fine, but then please also talk to the financial ministry because they may have additional stuff to think of, and they're coming with such a list. So, identifying stakeholders is important because there are sources of requirements, but they may also be sources for abuse cases. So, as we will see in the threat modeling, people within these different stakeholders may have interests in your software that are not valid or legit, and you need to address this. So if you're at a stock exchange, a user of a company who is registered as a stock exchange may be a stakeholder, may also be a source for an abuse case. He wants to trick the software to, for example, change a timestamp so that afterwards, so that he can maximize his earnings by changing the timestamp of his stock exchange action. So these are possible stakeholders. You also have internal stakeholders. Of course, they are there as well. So you need to think about what is the workload for specific people within the development organization. If you would follow this approach, or maybe he has some abuse cases as well. So you may want to change and build a backdoor or something. So looking at the different stakeholders is an important input for requirements and for later abuse cases. So it serves two goals. Furthermore, maybe your software is going to run in regulated environments or in standardized environments, and then you need to have compliance systems to follow. So you need to follow, it's going to be part of an ISMS, of an information security management system. Then there are controls of the ISO 27001 to follow, like, for example, you need role management. So individually, as we spoke yesterday, maybe applications are well suited without any users and roles, but then it needs to be run there, and okay, I need roles. I need users, and consequently roles. I may run ITIL as a service management, IT service management organization, as an IT. I'm a service provider. I'm using that service in that context. I may have additional requirements. Or requirements from accounting systems, like COBIT, COSO, and so on. There's a number of things you may come over, and you may need to look up whether you need additional requirements. How to get to requirements? Well, ask your stakeholders. All right. So in my experience is most stakeholders, and specifically the customers, do not know how to formulate requirements. So you must help them formulating good requirements. And this is an interactive process. So you go back and forth. Typically, until requirements are in a good shape, you need some weeks. So therefore, agile development is well suited for that process because you have interaction with the customer anyway on a regular basis. So you refine the security requirements over weeks and weeks, and you only put it onto the product backlog if you think now it's good. Even if it's not good, that doesn't matter in an agile process, because you perform it, and if it's not fulfilling the needs, then you don't accept it. So either you throw it away or put a new requirement on top of it. Doesn't matter, so that's good. What should be not part of the product is often a helpful question. So if people are having difficulties in terms of security requirements, ask them for what shouldn't work, what should not be part of that functionality. You should document requirements. I won't go into detail into just because of time. And now we could look at standard requirements in terms of security. So of course, you have the main security requirements. You know these three probably: confidentiality, integrity, availability. The problem with these three is these are attributes of information. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability are capabilities of information. You would say this type of information, this customer record is confidential. You wouldn't say this application is confidential. You wouldn't say this process is confidential. But you would probably want to have a process, a business process that you implement in software to have some integrity. So you cannot change it through external influences. There should be non-repudiation for processes. Right? So it's not as easy. So this is for information, but you need to look at which information should have what capability. So for example, for data privacy, not all information that you can keep about people needs to be kept confidential. Right? So you need to find out which information. Security requirements are somewhat different from normal requirements. Specifically, non-functional security requirements. And as I mentioned already, non-functional security requirements have more difficult acceptance criteria. So repeating. So acceptance criteria for functional requirements prove existence and correct functionality, whereas for non-functional requirements, proves non-existing of unwanted functionality. Let's give an example. Again, let's take the requirement: the application shall keep personal data confidential to the user. A bad example would be test whether user data can be accessed without being logged in. That's not specific enough. Much better would be, as a user that is not logged in, try to access confidential user data 10 times using different means and find that none of the approaches is successful. So describe the testing procedure and discovery, just like we did it in the other example. Or, as a user that is logged in, not logged in, log in, try to access confidentiality of other users in the same way. Okay. Finally, you need to consider that security requirements can actually interact with other requirement areas, with usability, performance, and so on. And they may contradict each other, but they may also help each other. And you need to have this in mind. Let's take usability, for example. From a security standpoint, which information should not be presented at the user interface? So instead of thinking all information should be presented, maybe it's better not to present things. Who is the target group? And what is the context of use? How should the security functions be used? So if you integrate functions into processes, which security measures would you enforce? Let's take an example for this. You probably know the warning that comes in the browser when you access a website where the certificate has not the right name of whether the name of the web address doesn't match the name that is in the certificate, which is a hilarious mistake, and it shouldn't exist, because users then they wouldn't take that seriously in general, because it's happening so often that people click on extended version, continue. from a security usability standpoint, this should be avoided because it leads people to behave risk averse. So they won't be susceptible to that originally good thing that okay, I'm trying to access a website and it claims to be a website which is not proven, so I shouldn't go there. But since it happens so often, people are accustomed to click continue, and maybe they will go to a site one day where actually it's indeed a bad site. It has been hacked. So, therefore, think about the security interactions you have with the user. So there should be clear, simple, and they should avoid contradictions and should avoid this type of behavior. Very simple interaction with users. No complicated information. I cannot verify your address. Please look at page number 10 and verify that your property is blah blah blah. Then you can click continue. Yes, no, period. Right. Security aspect of performance. Oops. Sometimes performance is important for security. So you need to have transaction times perform in a certain manner, especially if you're in the authentication process. If you say want to authenticate with SMS sending, as we just shortly explained yesterday, and the SMS sending may take between say 15 seconds and 3 minutes, but your authentication limit is 1 minute. Probably not going to work every case. So you need to relate these two things, right? Maybe performance activities, performance elements may be critical to security. Same for the availability, say for example for stock exchange systems, or maximum of concurrent users. If you manage to create a denial of service, not by purpose, just by having too much users, because your website has not been set up correctly, that may lead to security inconsistencies. Not only that it's not available, but you may read states in the processing of your organization of the system where it's where the web server itself is going to be vulnerable against attacks. So it's important as well. Okay, so let's come to the exercise. I would like you to have groups of 2 or 3 people. Now, okay, we need to have groups of 2 or 3 people now. I won't continue until the groups are finished. We are 7. 3, 2, 2, exactement. C'est qui va faire le 3 et qui va faire le 2? We will keep this group until the end of the module. So you will do your homework in this group. Alors j'attends. Et c'est qui? Et c'est qui avec qui?
Non. Parce qu'Orage, il a dit qu'il va travailler avec ça de la place. C'est toi qui as dit que tu vas travailler avec moi. Non,
Vous y êtes? Alors, on peut continuer? Vous avez formé les groupes? No. You can work alone, but then you will have someone besides you. You know, sometimes it's the way it is. Alors, comment est-ce que vous voulez vous couper? Alors, vous y êtes? Vous êtes prêts? Vous avez des groupes? C'est bon? C'est bon? D'accord, merci beaucoup. Here's the question. Okay, next. Describe the scope, the stakeholders, and the compliance system for the application, whether there is compliance requirements for your scenario. So the scope, so the setup, stakeholders, and compliance system. List the 10 most important functional and security requirements for your application, functional and non-functional. Make sure that your requirements have good quality and formulate corresponding acceptance criteria. And I would expect that you write accept the scope and the stakeholder description and the compliance description first, that you enter these then here in such a table, that you have a table approach for describing these different things. Number, requirement, stakeholder, compliance, which system, functional or non-functional, acceptance criteria. And I would like you to start with one line for today, without describing scope, stakeholders, and compliance in detail as homework, so that you start discussing on how to use such a table in your group. The rest you need to do this then in your group for the final module, which is in 3 weeks or so. Okay? Did you understand what I mean? So what you need to do now here in the room, I repeat, is which project are you going to work on? Which software lifecycle model you want to use? And create one line to know how to fill out and how to apply it once. And I would like you in the homework to have 10 lines. And the whole documentation is necessary here.
Means 10 important functional
and 10 non-functional. 10 and 10. D'accord, vous avez compris? Alors maintenant, vous avez 20 minutes pour démarrer ça. Alors vous imaginez un scénario, vous décidez quel module de développement vous auriez prendre et vous décrivez une ligne ici pour essayer d'avoir revu chaque critérium une fois. Donc, pour démarrer, s'il y a des questions, s'il y a, if you still need to understand specific things or there's some additional information necessary, how this works, then I can explain it here. So we have validated that you can actually process the exercise at home. Okay, good. Then let's start.